Good afternoon, friends. Friends, we are going to discuss today how to draft reply to show cause notice. But before I come to the topic, let us understand what is show cause notice. In fact, it is the first stage of litigation so far as GST is concerned. For any recovery of demand of tax, interest, penalty, or any other sum due from the supplier, you have to serve him a show cause notice. Even if he has collected the tax which he was not supposed to collect, even then show cause notice is required to be issued. This show cause notice may be a result of any audit, inspection, search, or any other proceeding. So, for any recovery of demand, show cause notice is a must. You understand that. Secondly, what are the circumstances for which the show cause notice can be issued? There are four circumstances for which the show cause notice can be issued. One is non-levy of tax, short levy of tax, any amount has been erroneously refunded which the revenue wants to recover it, and any input tax wrongly availed or utilized, or there is any demand of tax, interest, or penalty for any reason, maybe in appellate proceedings or in any other proceeding under the law, show cause notice has to be issued. If you look at the CGST provisions, then you will appreciate that show cause notice can be issued under Section 73 or Section 74. There is not much difference between Section 73 and 74. Both can be issued under all the four situations which you have already discussed, that is, non-payment, short payment, wrong claim of credit, or wrong utilization of ITC. But Section 73 shall apply when such short payment, etc., is for reason other than fraud or willful misstatement or suppression of fact. If such non-levy or short payment or erroneous refund or wrong utilization of credit is due to fraud or willful misstatement or suppression of fact, then show cause notice has to be served under Section 74. Now the question comes when this show cause notice can be issued. If you know the existing pre-GST era, then under service tax, excise and custom, there was a time limit for issuance of a show cause notice, but there was no time limit for adjudicating those show cause notices. But in GST era, now the time limit for passing an order, that means adjudication of that notice, has been prescribed, which is 3 years from the relevant date when we talk about notice under Section 73, and it is 5 years from the relevant date if the show cause notice has been issued under Section 74. As we have already told you, 74 shall be applicable when that non-payment, etc., is by reason of fraud, willful misstatement, suppression of fact. And in the case of show cause notice issued under Section 74, the show cause notice must be issued 6 months prior to the issuance of the order. And similarly, under Section 73, this limit is 3 months. As I told you that the order has to be passed within 5 years on the relevant date. What is relevant date? Relevant date is the due date of filing the annual return. To take an example, if we are talking about 17-18, then we know that the annual return for the financial year 17-18 is to be filed by 31st of December 2018. Therefore, show cause notice under Section 73 has to be issued 3 months prior to the date of passing an order, which is 3 years from the relevant date, that is up to 31st of December 2021. So under 73, the show cause notice has to be issued 3 months prior to that. That means it must be served on the SSC before 1st of October 2021. And similarly, the time period shall be calculated under Section 74 also. Now, there is an exception being created in GST law where they say if you have filed any return under Section 39 and there is a self-assessed tax due, then in that case, show cause notice is not required to be issued. According to my understanding, this position is absolutely incorrect because under section 39, return cannot be filed unless otherwise I have discharged my due tax. Similarly, under section 75, they have put up certain conditions which will be applicable while adjudicating the notices issued under section 73 or 74. If I have issued a show cause notice for a particular period and the same allegations are there against the assessee, then rather than issuing the full show cause notice once again, I can issue a statement which has been called statement in lieu of show cause notice. No show cause notice shall be issued under section 73 if tax along with applicable interest on the basis of his own ascertainment has been paid by the assessee. If the taxpayer pays the tax along with applicable interest within 30 days from the date of issuance of a show cause notice, even then there is no penalty which is leviable and the proceeding will be concluded if the show cause notice under section 73. But in the case of notice issued under section 74, you have to pay penalty which is equivalent to 50% of the tax amount if it is being made before the issuance of show cause notice, then no notice will be issued. If it is being paid within 30 days from the date of issuance of a notice, then the amount of penalty will be 25% of the tax, which is ought to be paid. Then comes quantum of penalty. As I told you, under section 73, if I pay the tax and interest, no penalty. If I pay tax and interest within 30 days from the issuance of the show cause notice, again no penalty. And maximum penalty which is leviable is 10% of the tax or rupees 10,000. But in the case of 74, because there is this non-payment etc. is due to fraud etc., so penalty amounts are much more and the provisions are more severe. For example, if I pay the tax and interest before show cause notice, even in that scenario, I have to pay 50% of the tax as penalty. If I don't want any litigation, then I can pay tax, interest, and 25% of the tax as penalty after the issuance of a show cause notice after 30 days. And after 30 days of receipt of the order, that means once the adjudication is being done, the maximum amount of penalty will be 50% of the tax. But otherwise, maximum penalty shall be 100% of the tax ought to be evaded. I'll repeat it once. If I pay the tax, interest and 50% of the tax as penalty after the passing of adjudication order, then there will be no further proceeding. But in case I don't pay within 30 days after passing the order, then the maximum penalty leviable will be 100%. Then friends, now I am reading certain provisions from section 75 which are made applicable. And the first thing I want to tell you that this time limit of 3 years or 5 years will get extended if by order of a court or an appellate tribunal some stay has been granted to that proceeding. So during the period of stay will be added in the period when the show cause notice can be issued by the department. For example, if there is a stay of 1 year by a court in a particular proceeding, then in that case, show cause notice under section 73 can be issued within 4 years and similarly under section 74 within 6 years. Where the appellate authority has not established the allegation of fraud, though initially they have issued with the show cause notice under section 74, but the department failed to convince the court that there is an element of fraud, willful misstatement, suppression of fact, then the law provides that the demand for the normal period, that is time limit prescribed under section 73 shall be applicable, and the demand will be calculated in terms of the provision of section 73. That means extended period benefit shall not be available. To say it in simple terms, I will try to say that notice will not become totally void ab initio because the department has failed to prove the allegation of fraud, willful misstatement, suppression of fact. but it shall convert into a show cause notice issued under section 73. Then an opportunity of hearing has to be granted, but that hearing will be granted by the adjudicating authority only when a request has been made in writing. And more importantly, the adjournment in those proceedings can be only sought for 3 times. Now, there are certain issues which one must keep in mind before he start drafting the reply to show cause notice. These were the statutory provision we have discussed, and the one important issue is, which is a settled principle of law under excise and service tax, and of course the position remains the same, it remains indirect tax, and the other things are also similar. So one thing is very clear, that no one can go beyond the scope of show cause notice. If in a show cause notice the demand proposed is on a particular allegation, let us say 10 lakh rupees, and later on the department realizes that they have wrongly calculated the tax and it should have been 12 lakh, so they have to serve me another show cause notice for 2 lakh, or alternatively, if there is some calculation error, they have to serve me a corrigendum to the show cause notice to recover 12 lakh. In the absence of both, the maximum amount of tax which can be confirmed against me is only 10 lakh. Similarly, the proposition with regard to interest and penalty, if the penalty is being proposed under a particular section, then penalty cannot be levied any other section except the one which is being mentioned. So far as interest is concerned, now for the first time they have mentioned that even if the mention is not being made in the show cause notice, the recovery of interest will not be deferred and it can be recovered from the SSC, and that will not become time barred. Even with the mention of relevant statutory provision of charging of interest is not being mentioned in the show cause notice. This is coming from the second bullet point, interest on tax not paid or short paid shall be payable whether or not specified in the adjudication order. The adjudication proceeding shall be deemed to be concluded where the order is not issued within the time limit. So kindly appreciate, once you have been served with a show cause notice, we'll see how to file the reply. But in adjudication order, if that is not been passed within the stipulated period of 3 to 5 years, then the proceeding seems to have been concluded in favor of the assessee and no recovery can be made from the supplier. Now, where this is a concept, I will not read, you can go through this slide itself, but this is a concept which is similar to call book. For example, there is one decision taken by an assessee, and then the department has gone in appeal, wherein the appeal has been decided against the revenue, the appeal has been further filed before the appellate authorities. Then if the department want to suspend the proceedings, which is being called call book, so the similar kind of proposition has been provided in the GST law also. So while computing the time limit of 3 to 5 years, if the matter has been suspended, so that period of suspension will also be excluded while calculating the time limit of 3 years or 5 years. Where any penalty has been imposed under section 73 or section 74, then penalty cannot be imposed any other provisions like 122, 129, etc. Now, this is the practical aspect of it. After understanding what is show cause notice, what are the time limit and how it will be adjudicated by the adjudicating authority, now we must understand that this is the foundation of the notice. Why I am saying so? The issue is very simple, because it is the first opportunity to the SSC to counter the allegation made by the department in writing and put up all his defenses before the authorities. So for that matter, one must understand that this show cause notice has been served well within the time, as we have already discussed earlier. Then validity of show cause notice must be verified in pursuant to section 75 of the Act. 75 is being mentioned because in 75 there are two situations like suspension of proceeding by the court and other things. So we have to read 3 years and 5 years along with section 75. If the notice has not been served within the time limit, then the demand will become time barred. Kindly appreciate. Once again, I am repeating, if the show cause notice, either under section 73 or section 74, is not being served within the time specified in the section, that is 3 months and 6 months prior to the passing of the order, which is again 3 years and 5 years from the relevant date, the demand shall become totally time barred. Now, service of show cause notice does not mean merely service of show cause notice. If you look at the show cause notice, the department always give a list of the document which are being relied upon by them. And those relied upon document has also to be served to the SSC, and once the RUD has been served, that is the date when the show cause notice service is deemed to have been completed by the department, and that date must satisfy the test of time limit. Now, I am giving you two judgments. Of course, the first is Centrogen Silk Milk versus CC. Though this is a judgment of Sestat Mumbai, but it has been confirmed by the Supreme Court also, wherein they have stated merely inspection of RUD is not sufficient. You have to provide the copies of the RUD to complete the service of show cause notice. And another judgment is of Rajasthan High Court, which is in the case of PGO Processors Private Limited versus Central Excise. Now, once you have received the show cause notice, how you will proceed? First of all, you must examine whether the notice has been issued by the jurisdictional proper officer. If it is not, then the whole demand can be challenged on this limited ground. If you look at the pre-GST era, there are a number of judgments supporting this proposition. I was registered as decentralization basis in Delhi, Bombay, and Calcutta, but the raid is being conducted at my Delhi office. Though I was registered at three other places, the demand is being proposed only under Delhi show cause notice. It is held by the court that the demand which pertains to the Bombay and Calcutta office is not at all recoverable because it is not being issued by the proper officer. Second issue, second precaution which one must take, that is quantification of demand. Sometimes we provide them balance sheets, our returns and other documents during the investigation proceeding, and they simply calculate the demand multiplied with the rate of tax on the figures given in the balance sheet. There may be a situation where those balance sheet figures are not actually the figures on which the tax is leviable from accounting point of view. I'll just give you an example. For example, I am a service provider. In my balance sheet, there is a service provision of 5 crore rupees. But I have received 5 lakh rupees in advance 6 months prior to the finalization of balance sheet on which I have discharged the liability. So obviously, my turnover includes that billing of 5 lakh for which I have discharged the liability at the time of receipt of advance. So I need to verify that the demand is being proposed only after the credit for advance tax is being given. Secondly, most of the time it is also being seen that they multiply the gross value with the rate of tax, and if my price was inclusive of tax, then I have to ensure and see that whether the benefit of cum duty is also being involved or not. Most of the time, the department, either due to non-cooperation from the assessor's point of view or because of any other reason, if the show cause is for 2 years, 3 years, or 5 years, they invoke the provision of best judgment assessment, which has been provided in Section 63, and which can be done only under that situation. So one must challenge that also if that assessment is on the higher side by proving that this is the balance sheet and these are the actual figures. So in a way, what I am trying to suggest to you, you please verify arithmetically and also ensure wherever there is a benefit of cum duty should be available to you that has been granted to you while issuing the show cause notice. If that is not being done, so one ground should be quantification of demand, that the demand has been calculated wrongly and the actual demand should be this. Sometimes we need to bifurcate certain supplies and then in support thereof, in case we can give a certificate from a chartered accountant, then that can certainly help it. This is particularly in the case of services because service tax is to be paid on receipt basis, whereas my recording of revenue may be not on the receipt basis, and even if it is on the receipt basis, the advances are not being considered therein. So, arithmetical accuracy of the demand, the rate of tax also need to be verified. For example, if I am dealing in number of supplies, I have to look at it that all my supplies are being taxed or proposed to be taxed at the rate at which I am liable to pay the tax. Then the next step which one should ensure is to go through the show cause notice carefully and see whether all the statutory provision which were liable to be used against me have been rightly used. Why I am saying so? Because during the passage of time there is always a change in law. For example, if we talk about service tax, then we all know that up to 30th June 2012 it was leviable on specified taxable services, and thereafter under the negative list all services except negative list was subject to tax under service tax law, that is Finance Act 1994. But if I am issuing the show cause notice covering some period under the negative list and covering some period under the taxable clause, specific taxable clauses, then I need to invoke both the charging section which were applicable in the pre-negative list and also during the negative list. For example, for the negative list period, if the demand is being proposed, they must invoke section 66B read with the definition of service 65 capital B subclause 44. But prior to that, if that is so, they have to invoke charging section 66 read with specific clause which was applicable in relation to those services. So those can be the situation in GST also. Once the litigation will start, maybe some law has been amended. So we have to ensure that the period in dispute must be supported by the allegation which are leviable or chargeable against the supplier and relevant sections are being correctly reported. Show cause notice must be very, very specific with regard to allegation, and if it is very vague and no proper notice has been given, so we have seen in the past also that those show cause notice held by the court that they are not valid show cause notice, and in some of the show cause notice even they have been quashed on the principle of vagueness. Very important judgment is of Messrs. Shubham Electrical given by Delhi Tribunal and which is being affirmed by Delhi High Court. So there are number of other judgments also, but we have to make sure that the show cause notice is very specific and it is not vague and not suffer from the arbitrariness. Now, while drafting the show cause notice, of course, the department has mentioned that you have to file the reply in GST CMP 06 form. But if you go to that form, which we are giving at the end of this slide presentation, you will find it only contains the basic information, but so far as statement of facts is concerned, that you have to draft. And that is the issue on which I want to dwell upon in detail now. The nature of activities on which the demand is being proposed should be very clearly be put into the statement of facts. On which activity the demand is being proposed. If the demand is being proposed on more than one issue, then each issue need to be properly explained, and if possible, the documents supporting those transactions. It may be invoice, it may be agreements, it may be receipts which are being issued, it may be any other correspondence between the supplier and the recipient. they should also be attached therein. This is very, very important because tribunal is the final fact finding authority, and if the facts are not being properly explained, so there is a possibility that decision is also not being done on the correct facts. Then, if possible, you must prepare a date chart from the date of investigation till the issuance of show cause notice and explaining what are the important events that has happened in between, showing your cooperation during investigation, and then prepare a detailed chart issue wise what is the demand of tax with respect to each issue, so that if there are four issues and the court decides two issues in your favor, so the court should be able to quantify the relief for which you are entitled to. Similarly, with regard to penalties under which section they have been proposed, each penalty has to be dealt separately. There is no doubt about that. So this chart, if it is made out in tabular form, I think that will be much better. First of all, we can say in the first column, what is the serial number, then what is the issue involved, what are the allegation, what is your stand, and how much is the demand of that issue. Similarly, for the purpose of penalties also, it should be done. One thing I am again repeating for the sake of repetition, that show cause notice is the foundation and the department cannot go beyond the scope of show cause notice. If any allegation they forget to levy or allege against the supplier or the person to whom the notice is being issued, then they have to serve me another show cause notice if the time limit permits. Thereafter, one must explain what is the stand of the department. Before you put up your own case, the case of the department should be very clearly made out and mentioned after we talk about the SSC and the transaction on which the demand is being proposed. The third is case of the department, why the department wants the noticee to pay the tax. Then, once the show cause notice is being served to you and you have got the department view also, you should go to a consultant, take his advice, and in case he feels that some of the demand is really payable, you don't have a good legal case against that, then according to my understanding, the noticee must pay that tax, that amount of tax, where he does not have a good case along with interest in order to save further the liability of interest and penalty. As I told you, if I am making the payment of tax and interest prior to the adjudication order, then the quantum of penalty is less, which we have already discussed. I will not repeat it, but I'll say certainly if admitted tax is being paid, there is no doubt we will save the further interest and the penalty amount also. While in case I want to dispute all the issues or some of the issues, then with regard to all those issues, what are the possible defenses available to me? I must put up all the possible defenses in a systematic manner without prejudice to each other. There may be a situation when I say my liability is not taxable, then I can say if it is taxable, I am covered in that exemption. Let us say if that exemption is not being given, then the valuation is not correct, this rate of tax is not correct, or the benefit of cum duty should be given. So even if some grounds go against each other, we can always argue them once we are taking them without prejudice to each other. Why I am saying so? Because if these grounds are not being taken here, then in the subsequent appellate proceeding, we shall not be allowed to pursue additional grounds except when they are the legal grounds. So far as legal grounds are concerned, that can be taken at any point of time. So now, you can say, Mr. Batra, once show cause notice is being issued and department has alleged certain things, there are two interpretations possible. How can I ensure myself that the interpretation taken by me, which has been supported in the past by the court judgment, may also apply to the GST also. Friends, let me tell you, the decisions which have been taken in the past will not be totally become irrelevant. If the law is paramateria and the facts are similar, those decisions still have a binding precedent. Yes, if the law is not paramateria and some ratio has been laid down, you want to rely on those ratio, and then the law need to be paramateria in case you want to have an advantage of that judgment. Then in some cases we have seen that the department also rely upon certain case laws. If the department wants to rely upon certain case law, then we need to distinguish those judgments, why they are not applicable in the facts of my case. Because if I am not able to do that, then the department case has been proved. And in case I find it difficult, so that means you are admitting your demand. So we have to take a call whether the reliance by the department on a certain case law is as per the legal proposition. If yes, then it is the admitted demand, you must pay. If not, you have to distinguish those cases. Finally, sometimes the department uses certain statements made by somebody against you or certain documents which they have come across during the investigation proceeding. Then if they want to use those documents against the noticee, they must provide the opportunity and must make available that material to the noticee, and in the case of statement, the opportunity for cross-examination should also be given. If not being given, you should ask for it if any statement has been used against you. Now, there are certain common grounds which we need to understand, which we should take in reply to every show cause notice. For example, I am liable to pay certain GSTs under reverse charge mechanism. It is an advocate fees I am liable to pay, but then that credit is available to me while discharging my liability, and I forgotten to do that. So whether there is any loss to the revenue, kindly appreciate. I am a chartered accountant. Let us say my liability is rupees 1,000, but I have taken some opinion from my advocate in order to support my opinion, which I have given to my client, and I have charged him, including the charges which I have paid to the advocate in my professional charges. Now, advocate raises an invoice of rupees 100 on which under reverse charge I was liable to pay the GST, and I forgot to do that. So now the question is, once I have raised an invoice of 1,000 during that particular month, and I have paid full GST on that amount, in case I would have paid the tax to the advocate, then that amount would have been available as an input tax credit. So there is no loss to the revenue, even though I have certainly not complied with the provisions as laid down in the Act. So in that case, we can say the tax should not be demanded, and maybe if I have not complied with the law, some amount of penalty, reasonable amount of penalty may be levied upon me. Similarly, if the transactions under GST laws between two distinct persons and I forget to charge my another distinct persons under the same PAN, let us say the entity on PAN basis having three offices, Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta. Delhi office has provided some service to Bombay office, but they have not raised an invoice. But that service, if case Delhi office would have charged the tax, would have been available as a credit to the Bombay office. So can we take a ground as there is no loss of revenue, I should not be penalized, rather because of non-compliance of some provisions, a nominal penalty may be imposed against me. So now another ground which you need to take in every reply to show cause notice, if that is being issued under section 74. 73, as I told you, can be issued only when the non-payment, short payment, erroneous claim of refund or wrong availment or utilization of credit is not because of fraud, collusion, willful misstatement, suppression, etc. So now, once they have served me a show cause notice under section 74, I can say you will always allege me the allegation of fraud in order to cover your show cause notice within the time. But if the non-payment of tax or short payment is due to interpretation of law, due to my bona fide belief that I am not liable to pay the tax, due to the fact that the issue remained a subject matter of litigation for considerable period of time, or because of any reason, because non-payment of tax does not mean there is a fraud. If I have recorded the transaction in my books of account, that itself shows my bona fide. In case I would have a mala fide intention, the transaction would not have recorded in my books of accounts. If I does so, and I argue and I am able to convince to the court, then as I have already read that 74 notice shall be converted into a notice under section 73, and in 73 the demand for relevant period, which is only 3 years, and in under section 74 the extended period can be moved up to 5 years on the relevant period. So the demand of 2 years will become time barred, because then section 74 shall be treated as a notice issued under section 73, and the demand covered in that period, during that period, can only be confirmed. So this extended period is not invocable, is a very good defense, and it must be taken, and one must apply his all knowledge, experience to convince to the court that there was no element of fraud, willful misstatement, or suppression. Friends, here I would like to share with you, if you talk about the pre-GST era, in service tax and excise, earlier on there used to be 5 reasons for invoking the extended period. And those 5 grounds were fraud, collusion, willful misstatement, suppression of fact, and non-compliance of provision with the intent to save service tax. Now there are only 3 events: fraud, willful misstatement, and suppression of fact. Collusion and non-compliance of provision with the intent to evade service tax, these 2 conditions have been excluded. So now, rather the things have become easier for me, I have to only prove that there is no fraud, willful statement, and suppression of fact. I have perhaps not spoken correctly in the earlier time when I was dealing with this subject. Kindly make note. 2 conditions, that is collusion and non-compliance of provision with the intent to evade service tax, is not the condition in GST. In GST, there are only 3 conditions: fraud, willful misstatement, and suppression of fact. There can be a situation where if the demand is being proposed, it can result into double taxation. For example, I am a subcontractor and my contractor has discharged the liability on the full amount which he has received from the contractor. I was a subcontractor. I am being served show cause notice. Maybe I have not charged tax from the main contractor. Then can I take a plea that once that transaction has been subject to tax, and if case I would have been charging the tax, he would have got the credit, and now demanding the tax from me where the credit is not available will result into double taxation of the same transaction. I'll explain you with an example. Let us say there is a contract of 100 crores. GST liability is 20%. So on 20 crore tax has been paid by the main contractor. I am a subcontractor wherein I have been given a contract of 30 crores. So I do that activity, but I didn't charge any GST. Now the notice has been served to me, you have liable to pay the tax. So I am asking, can I take a defense on 30 crore, the demand is 6 crore. If case you recover that 6 crore, which was otherwise available to the main contractor as a tax credit, then the department would have got only 20 crores on 100 crore rupees supply, which they have already received. And taxing me will tantamount to double taxation on the same transaction. There have been earlier on certain judgments which has been appearing on this slide. But lately we have seen that the court have started saying that if the revenue neutrality is in your own hand, as I explained you earlier, in the case of reverse charge mechanism, some benefit is being given. But as the law does not provide any exemption or any mechanism where in case you don't charge to the main contractor who has discharged his full liability and does not give you any immunity, nowadays it is not a good defense. But in any case, we can always say so, because if it does not result into reduction in the demand of tax, certainly there cannot be any malafide. So we can say that there should not be any penalty being imposed because the intention was not to evade the tax. Once again, I am repeating, it may not help you in reducing the demand, but certainly it will help you in combating provisions with regard to the penalty. Now, interest under Section 50 is not payable and is consequential, and even I have told you, for the recovery of interest, show cause notice is not required. One thing which I would like to further impress upon, you must submit all the relevant document on which you want to rely, like the department has done while serving you the show cause notice, because this is the first stage. Later on, in case you have to produce any additional evidence before the appellate authorities, then appellate authorities will certainly ask you why these documents were not produced before the authorities below, and then you may have to file an additional application for admitting additional evidence or additional legal ground. Additional legal ground, there is no problem, but additional evidence, if you are not able to prove that you did your best and because of unforeseen circumstances these documents could not be produced, your application may be liable to be rejected. So, friends, I was talking to you the importance of giving all the evidences along with the reply to the show cause notice, because if we are not able to prove that these evidences could not be produced before the authorities, that is the court may take a view why this additional evidence should be considered at this stage of appeal. It is not like that. You will never get an opportunity to file the additional evidence before the appellate authority. You can do so by filing an application for admitting the additional evidence, and further you have to prove that you were prevented by some causes which were unavoidable, beyond your reach. Then only those evidences can be admitted by the court. And there is a possibility that those application may also be negated by the court. In that case, you have to defend your case only on the basis of the evidence which has been provided at the time when the adjudication proceedings were going on. Now, friends, after considering the tax, as I told you, there are only four defense available in any indirect taxes. One is you are out of the charging section. Third is the subject matter, which is supply in the case of GST. I do not fall in the definition of supply. Third is I am being given exemption either under goods or services under any exemption notification. And once these three, the defenses are not available, then we have to look at the valuation part of it, whether I am liable to pay tax at the value at which the demand is being proposed against me in the show cause notice. And finally, I have also to see that the time is being paid in terms of the point of taxation rules. If I am able to say that the demand was due subsequently, I can save a huge amount of interest also. Now I am coming to the issue of penalty. Penalty is never automatic. Merely non-payment of tax does not mean that penalty shall be leviable. If you look at a Supreme Court judgment, a landmark judgment, Pratibha Processor, where the Honorable Apex Court has explained the nature of demand under the fiscal law, they say tax, if payable, has to be paid. The department is not able to recover it, they may bad at it, but demand has to be created. Interest is compensatory in nature. If I am liable to pay any amount on a particular date and I don't discharge that liability and I come subsequently and pay the tax, for the intervening period, you are liable to pay the interest. The same principle applies to the government also. When I am claiming a refund and the department does not sanction me the refund within the stipulated period, then beyond a period of 3 months, they are liable to pay me the interest. It is a different matter that when I am liable to pay the interest, the rate of interest is 18/24%. When they are liable to pay the interest, at that point of time, the rate of tax is only 6%. Now comes to the most crucial aspect, that is penalty. Because as I told you, penalty is never automatic. If I have not paid the tax due to my bona fide belief, then I cannot be subject to penalty. And in case I have not paid the tax due to mala fide, then certainly penalty is leviable. So mens rea is a concept which is applicable in the case of penalties. So while agitating the penalty, we need to be very, very careful, because that is one area where if we smartly argue the matter and we put up all the defenses and the case law in our favor in such a manner, we are able to convince to the court that I don't have any mala fide intention, the payment is not being made, because this issue involves interpretation of law. For example, the industry was not paying, and there are two views which are coming out from the language of the law, and I have taken the one view which is being covered under the exemption notification. But simply saying so is not going to help you. You have to prove that out of that clause of penalty, or out of that proposition, there have been two interpretations which are possible. If the law language is absolute and clear, then it is not going to help you. Then we have to prove our bona fide. If that confusion has arisen because of the circular being issued by the department, which may or may not be binding on the court, if the department has issued a circular and I misled by that circular, but later on the department revisited that circular and said no, our understanding in the previous circular was not correct, and it was against the statutory provision. This is the clear understanding. And we have seen in service tax regime, there have been revisit of circular quite often by the department. Then we can always take that ground. Okay, this is the circular which put us into doubt, and relying on that, I did not discharge the liability. But later on, when the circular was being revisited by the department, I started paying the tax. In my humble opinion, in that situation, penalty may not be leviable. And if the issue is under litigation and one tribunal gave one view, another tribunal gives another view, and finally the matter is pending before the larger bench, and if during the period of dispute I was relying upon a judgment which was in my favor, and ultimately that issue is getting against me, in my humble opinion, I will be liable to pay tax. Of course, interest, as I told you, is compensatory in nature. So obviously, I will have to pay the interest also. But in that case, penalty shall not be leviable. So it is a subject which is subject matter of litigation in all the statute, either is income tax, service tax, excise, and number of case laws are available. So looking to the facts of your case, what is the situation, what is the case law which can help you in contesting the penalty? One must do that, and do that with full force and applying his own mind using all the experience, because this is one area where even non-payment by two persons can have a different result. If one person has not paid the tax or claimed the refund or wrongly availed the credit because of interpretation of law, etc., he may not be subject to penalty. The another person may be subject to penalty. Penalty is always fact specific, but sometimes there have been ratios laid down in what situation the penalty cannot be levied. So we need to look at that. Then penalties are of different type. For example, non-payment of tax, late payment of tax, or wrong claim of credit where I am not having a proper duty paying document, I otherwise satisfy all the sine qua non which are required for the purpose of claim of credit. So there are number of judgments which says if you satisfy the sine qua non, and in the case of exemption notification it has to be strict interpretation. In the case of credit, if the basic important stipulations and conditions are being satisfied, then merely not following the procedure will not disentitle you for the benefit of that credit or that exemption. I'll just explain it in simple terms that penalty cannot be levied unless otherwise mala fide is proved. So we need to be very, very careful in presenting our case with regard to the penalty, and we must use our own experience because this is one demand which is at the discretion of the court or the adjudicating authorities. Grant of a personal hearing by the adjudicating authority is not only a statutory requirement but also a principle of natural justice. If in any case he has not given you a proper opportunity, then you can always take this as a ground. Now the question is, law says you cannot be given more than 3 adjournment, but in case the adjudicating authority has issued you a show cause notice specifying 3 alternate date of hearing in an interval of few days, is it proper 3 opportunities being given to you? It has been held in the case of Upload Textile versus CCE, reported in 2007 215 ELT 198, that one letter does not constitute 3 adjournment and the adjudicating authority cannot refuse to grant an adjournment to some other date other than those 3 dates fixed by one letter. The tribunal in the case of Jindal Waterways Limited and another versus CC, reported at 2009 247 ELT 715, held that even after 3 adjournments are granted, if certain cause of extreme difficulty is brought out on record, a further adjournment can be granted. Now friends, after understanding what is show cause notice, how the reply is to be drafted, now we must understand what are the important differences in earlier law and the GST law with respect to the issuance and service of show cause notices. As I told you, in earlier law, there was a time limit for the issuance of a show cause notice, but there was no time limit for the purpose of adjudication of the said notice. I have been telling time and again because it is a very important condition. If this notice is not being served within the stipulated period, the whole demand goes. Now, there is a time limit of issuance of a show cause notice, and that time limit is being prescribed in 2 different sections. Earlier on, there was only one section which used to deal with the show cause notice, whether the non-payment, short payment, erroneous claim of refund, or non-claim of credit was due to fraud, collusion, willful misstatement, or non-compliance of provision with the intent to evade service tax. Now the whole procedure has been divided into 2 sections. 73 shall apply where short payment etc. is there due to other than fraud, willful misstatement and suppression of fact, and 74 where such short payment etc. is due to fraud, willful misstatement and suppression of fact. I have repeated this term so many times, I am sure now you must have understood these 3 terminology. Now, unlike in the past, where there was a time limit for issuance of a notice, now there is a time limit for passing of an order. And the show cause notice has to be issued at least 3 months or 6 months prior to the time limit prescribed for issuance of order. Friends, now we are coming to the form which has been prescribed in this GST law, in which we have to file reply to the show cause notice. If we look at this form, then you will find it asks for basic information, GSTIN, then detail of the show cause notice, reference number, date, then the legal number of the legal name sorry, of the noticee, then trade name of the noticee, then address of the principal place of business, and then comes reply to the notice. They simply said reply to the notice. Now what we have been discussing is how to reply to the show cause notice. Once again, I would like to summarize the same. Here you can write as per detailed reply annexed herewith. But as I told you, after receiving the show cause notice, first of all you have to find out whether it has been issued by the proper jurisdictional officer. Then you have to find out the quantification of demand. Thereafter, the allegation made against you with regard to the tax, interest, and penalty. So far as allegation with regard to tax is concerned, how many allegations with each demand is being made. So each transaction wherein the demand is being proposed has to be explained clearly so that the factual proposition, how this transaction take place, is being properly recorded in the statement of facts. In fact, in the statement of facts, first you talk about the noticee, private limited company registered under so and so, and basic details, and then you come to the nature of transactions. Then the demand is to be tabulated, what are the issues involved, and in case the demand is being proposed on the penalty also, what are the various sections under which the penalty is being proposed. After that, you have to give a case of the department, why as per the department you are liable to pay tax or you are liable to pay penalty. Thereafter, you have to give your own case. While giving your own defenses, all possible defenses will be taken without prejudice to each other. You must refer to all notifications, circulars, law, documents on which you want to rely upon. And in case the department has relied upon certain case law, you need to distinguish those case law so as to prove your own case. If you are not able to distinguish those case laws, notifications, circular, etc., then it is admitted liability. And if that being so, it is suggested to pay at the earliest to minimize the further liability of interest and penalty. Then it says list of documents uploaded, which may include even the evidences which you want to rely upon. So now, verification part is there. I hereby solemnly affirm and declare that the information given herein is true and correct to the best of my knowledge and this is the similar verification which is there in form 9C, which is our audit form, and similar other situation also. And then it has to be duly signed by the authorized signatory. Though, in case you look at the note, they say the reply should not be more than 500 character. In case the same is more than 500 character, then it should be updated separately. Friends, if you ask me personally, when I shifted to service tax from income tax and I started giving reply to show cause notice, I was really surprised. I have never seen those kind of notices in income tax. Sometimes the show cause notice is as big as it runs into hundreds of pages. And 20, 30 pages are a very common phenomena. They also follow a standard procedure. They also come to the first of all the investigation, nature of investigation, nature of transaction, relevant statutory provision, how we are liable to pay the tax, what are the contravention which we have done, what are the allegations made against me, and finally, whatever documents they have collected during investigation, some of them which are in their favor, they want to rely upon and they make it a part of the show cause notice. That is why I was telling you that the date of service of show cause notice is the date when the show cause notice along with RUD is being submitted to you. There are judgments to that effect. If the show cause notice is being served, let us on 15th of March, and the RUD has been made available on 22nd of April, then the date of service of notice should be 22nd of April only. And then they proposed, this is the demand we want to propose under various sections. So, similar line of pattern, has to be followed by the noticee in response to that. What is my description? Something about you, what are the activities that you carry out, that is about the noticee, I say. Then you have to say what are the real nature of transaction. If it has been properly reported in show cause notice, it may be reproduced. If the facts have been distorted in the show cause notice, you have to place the facts which are the correct facts, and then those correct facts has to be supported by the invoices, receipt voucher and other documents, agreement, etc., which are available. Thereafter, as I told you, I'm once again repeating for the sake of repetition, thereafter, case of the department, why the department is of the view that I am subject to interest and penalty under each section. And then I have to put up my case, why I am not liable to pay tax under each of the allegation. And wherever I accept the allegation, I must pay the tax. And why I am not subject to penalty under each of the section. Because penalty under different section is for different purpose. There may be a penalty for late payment of tax, there may be a penalty for non-payment of tax, there may be a penalty for separately for credit. But one thing which we need to understand, once a penalty is being proposed under section 73, 74, then on that particular activity, penalty cannot be levied under any other section which I have already told you. With these words, I would like to conclude my discussion on this, how to reply show cause notice. I feel that this discussion, you will find it useful and it will help you in filing reply against the show cause notices which will be issued under the GST Act. Thank you, friends.